Hello everyone, welcome to Barry's Book Reviews. This is episode number 7. Today I'm reviewing a book I'm a huge fan of. It's The Boy Who Escaped Paradise by J.M. Lee and translated by Kim Chi-young. The English translation was published in 2016 and Kim is, as I've said in previous reviews, one of the most successful and highly regarded translators of the last decade and perhaps even longer. And J.M. Lee, his name is actually Lee Chong-myung, but he styles himself J.M. Lee on his books, on his novels. But Lee is an exceedingly popular writer of mainly historical fiction, and his books have sold millions of copies here in South Korea, and they're often picked up for film adaptations or TV adaptations. For example, his 2006 novel Deep Rooted Tree was adapted into a very popular TV show in 2011, and his best-selling 2007 novel Painter of the Wind was adapted into a hit 2008 film with a slight name change. It was called Painter of Beauty instead of Painter of the Wind. And The Boy Who Escaped Paradise is Lee's second novel to be translated into English. The Investigation was translated into English and released in 2014, and it was very warmly received. The Investigation is based on true events. It's set in a Japanese prison in 1944 against the backdrop of World War II and tells the story of the last years in the life of beloved Korean poet and dissident Yoon Dong-ju, who is famous for writing the poem Sky, Wind, Star and Poem. And it's also a murder mystery like The Boy Who Escaped Paradise. I actually heard a rumour a couple of years ago that another of Lee's books had been translated called The Gospel of the Murderer, about a killing spree in Jerusalem around the time of the crucifixion. However, it hasn't been published yet. Hopefully that one will see the light of day sometime soon as well. Today, though, I'm talking about Lee's second novel in English translation, The Boy Who Escaped Paradise. It was published to great acclaim in 2017 and I think is generally further evidence of the vibrancy of Korean genre fiction. However, despite this novel's many strengths, it seems to me like it slipped through the cracks a little bit. It doesn't get referred to as much as some of the other genre novels that have been translated in the last few years. And this is surprising because I think this might be the best of the crime novels published from Korea in the last few years, or certainly at least one of the best. It did get some good reviews when the English translation was published, and it was acclaimed, but it just seems like it dropped off the radar a little bit. So hopefully I can convince some of you to pick it up, because it truly is a great read. Before I get into the specifics about the book, maybe I'll just say a little bit more about the reception among Western critics. This was one of the books that caused some people to ask if Korean crime and genre novels would be the next big trend in international publishing. So I've mentioned this before, I'll just go into a little bit more. There was an article in the British newspaper The Guardian in March 2018. The article headline was "The New Scandi Noir?" ? The Korean writers reinventing the thriller. So there had been a wave of successful Scandinavian writers like Jo Nesbø, Stieg Larsson, and the industry was obviously looking around for the next big trend to jump on. So this led some to ask, are Korean crime genre novels the next big thing? That article mainly talked about Kim Eun-soo's The Plotters, which sparked a global bidding war and sold for 6 figures, and is great as well. I'll try and review it at some point soon. The article also highlighted that The Plotters was just the tip of the iceberg and suggested that the world was waking up to Korean thrillers and they're poised to be the next big thing. It also mentioned a couple of other interesting things. So it talks about language, and there was a quote that says, Korean writing can seem new to English readers due to the unique cadence and economy of the language. And then it quoted Deborah Smith, the translator of Vegetarian, and a couple of other things. And she said that, like, talking about translating from Korean to English as moving from a language more accommodating of ambiguity, repetition, and plain prose to one that favors precision, concision, and lyricism. So it's interesting to think about this sort of linguistic and translation dimension having an impact on how these novels are perceived and received. Genre fiction in Korea has traditionally been sort of looked down on. There's a significant separation between genre fiction and the type of writing that wins prizes here in Korea, although this may be changing to some extent. There's another interesting quote I want to mention because it's a great description for today's book. So, quote, "There is no grand tradition of mystery writing in Korea. Writers there are creating something entirely new, sparsely worded, stylistically sophisticated page-turners that incorporate ideas important to Korean society, such as family, loyalty, nature, and hierarchy." And that really is a good description of some aspects of today's book. So, The Boy Who Escaped Paradise is several things at once. It's a globe-trotting crime thriller, it's a coming-of-age tale about a North Korean refugee, it's an odd romance, it's even an oblique primer on mathematical theories such as Poincare's conjecture and Gödel's incompleteness theorem. The story begins in New York City, where the novel's protagonist, 24-year-old Gilmo, who has Asperger's, is arrested next to the body of a murdered North Korean defector. The dead man is surrounded by equations written in his blood. The CIA accuses Gilmo of being a murderer, gangster, and terrorist. From there, the story flashes back as Gilmo attempts to explain the circumstances that brought him to New York. The story he tells begins with his birth in North Korea in 1988 to a family of undertakers, his family struggle through North Korea's arduous march, almost starving in the process. But when his genius for math becomes apparent, he's moved to a school for talented youngsters and participates in Pyongyang's mass games. His education is cut short, however, when his father is discovered to be a secret Christian. Father and son are incarcerated in a prison camp where Gilmo meets a vicious warden who will reappear in his life in unexpected ways, and a beautiful young girl who will become his life's obsession. This is a novel with a fascinating and engaging central character. Gilmo is a wonderful creation. So Gilmo has Asperger's, and at times I was reminded of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, and even Forrest Gump. So two other novels that have neurodivergent protagonists. It's worth noting there's actually a small trend among recent Korean novels for these neurodivergent protagonists. For example, we have Almond by Son Won-pyong, I Hear Your Voice by Kim Young-ha, and The Good Son by Jung Yoo-jong. The Good Son actually has a not dissimilar opening scene to The Boy Who Escaped Paradise. It's quite interesting to look at those parallels. Gilmo is a math savant. He loves mathematical symmetry. He's not good with relationships in the traditional sense, although he does yearn for love, especially from a particular character. Throughout the novel, he explains the world around him through mathematical formulas and diagrams, and we actually see these diagrams and math equations on the page. Now, this could sound like it might be off-putting, but it isn't. There's something fascinating and inherently engaging about seeing the world through this character's eyes. So, for example, at one point, he describes his feelings of attachment for Yeong-ae as follows. But if the earth were shaped like a donut, you wouldn't be able to retrieve the long cord. It would either stay on the inner circumference or be wrapped around the part. Thinking about Poincare's conjecture reassured me. I knew I would be able to see Yeong-ae again. Earth is a sphere. She had left our point on Earth, but we were connected by an invisible cord. If I could follow that cord, I would meet up with her. He actually invents his own language and uses that to communicate with Yeong-ae. And it's fascinating to observe. Gilmo is a brilliant creation. He tells a story through his love of math and symmetry, equating his experiences to mathematical formulas. It's unique, and it's engaging, and it's inspiring. And I also found the novel's genre elements to be immensely enjoyable. The story starts in the criminal underbelly of North Korea, where we meet a series of almost Dickensian characters such as local vagabonds, homeless kids, corrupt prison wardens, and so on. The story eventually leads to the criminal underworlds of China and Japan, where Gilmo becomes embroiled with gangsters and crime bosses. There are shootouts and daring, inventive escapes, and a whole series of colourful characters drawn from the world of international crime. Eventually, the story takes the reader to the glittering luxury of Macau casinos, the Mexican desert, and eventually New York. All the while, there is the central mystery. Why is Gilmo in New York? And why did he kill this person, if he even did? The other big hook is his relationship with Yeong-ae. Will they ever meet again? The Boy Who Escaped Paradise is a literary thrill ride with a unique protagonist, a great cast of characters, and a clever, sophisticated story.